The alien fleet arrived without warning, their ships slicing through Earth's atmosphere. With a speed and precision that defied all known laws of physics, they descended from the sky, in an intricate formation, each ship as dark as the void itself, its surface gleaming like obsidian, but emitting no light of its own. The sound of their engines was a low hum of vibration that rattled the bones of every living thing below. The ships were not just machines, they were weapons, perfect in their design and devastating in their purpose. Cities across the globe felt the first tremors of their arrival. First, the sky split open, as if the heavens themselves were being torn apart. Then the blast of their weapons erupted like thunder, only it wasn't thunder, it was the shattering of reality. As Earth knew it, entire cities vanished in an instant, whole populations reduced to ash and dust. The alien ships loomed over the wreckage with cold indifference, their weapons fired again and again, leaving nothing but ruin in their wake. Humanity's response was as predictable as it was futile. Every military force mobilized its strongest weapons in a desperate bid to defend against the onslaught. Jets, rockets, bombs were launched into the sky, all in a futile attempt to strike back against a force so far beyond human technology that it seemed like an act of madness to even try. But the weapons never reached their targets. The aliens had no need to defend themselves against the primitive counterattacks. Earth's finest weapons fizzled out mid-flight or were disintegrated before they even got close to the enemy. The invasion was a massacre, and the world watched in helpless horror as their cities fell. It was clear that humanity was outmatched, outclassed in every way. The aliens moved with eerie precision. Their ships never deviated from their path. No waste, no excess, no mercy. They arrived as a storm to wipe the Earth clean, and nothing could stop them. The devastation spread quickly. The news reports showed images of fallen skyscrapers and smoldering ruins. The leaders of the nations gathered in hastily convened meetings in underground bunkers. They spoke of survival, of retreat, and regrouping, of sending what remained of humanity into hiding. But their voices trembled with fear. Their minds raced with questions they had never even begun to consider. What did these invaders want? Why had they come? And what could humanity do to stop them? Nothing made sense. The alien fleet appeared to be powered by an energy source beyond Earth's comprehension. Their ships moved faster than light. They could alter the very fabric of the atmosphere, and their weapons seemed capable of turning anything into vapor. With a single shot, it was a new era of warfare, and humans were entirely unprepared for it. But there was one thing the aliens hadn't counted on. There was one thing that all their technology and power couldn't predict, and that was the human will to survive, and the human thirst for knowledge. Even in the face of annihilation, there were those on Earth who would not surrender without a fight, who would look at the impossible and decide that it was only another challenge waiting to be overcome. In the underground labs of an old forgotten physics institute, far from the chaos of the invasion, Evelyn Coles sat hunched over a cluttered desk, her hands shaking as she sifted through the data she had gathered in the days since the aliens arrived. There was something about their ships, something that didn't make sense. It was a pattern she had noticed at the edge of the chaos, a glitch in their perfection. For years, Cole had been ridiculed for her radical theories about the nature of reality and space-time, but now she sat staring at what could be humanity's last hope. There was a signature hidden within the alien technology, something that seemed to break the very laws of physics that governed their universe. She had seen it before in her own theoretical work, but she had never believed it could be real. The world had fallen into panic. The streets were empty. The air was thick with fear and uncertainty. But deep in this secluded lab, Cole's mind was clear. She saw through the terror to something more fundamental, a puzzle that needed solving, and for the first time in days, she felt the stirrings of hope. She had been dismissed by her colleagues for too long, labeled as a dreamer, too obsessed with the idea of bending reality itself. But as she looked over the alien ship's energy signatures, she realized that the impossible was possible. After all, she wasn't crazy, she was onto something. It wasn't just their weapons or their ship's speed that defied explanation, it was the way they moved through space-time itself. There was no explanation for how they could warp the very air around them. Their ships seemed to bleed into different dimensions like shifting shadows. It was as if the fabric of space itself bent and twisted at their command. Cole's heart raced as she worked through the math. She had come to a terrifying conclusion. The aliens weren't just manipulating matter, they were manipulating the very space around them. She knew what she had to do, but it wouldn't be easy. Time was running out. Earth's last remaining forces had already begun their retreat to the underground bunkers. But Cole knew that retreating was not an option. Humanity needed to fight back, and for that to happen they needed to understand how to manipulate reality the same way the invaders had. Without wasting another moment, she reached out to a few trusted colleagues, scattered across the globe: physicists, mathematicians, engineers. She sent them encrypted messages containing the calculations and theories she had developed in isolation. She didn't care about the skeptics anymore. She didn't care about the naysayers. All that mattered was survival and the future of humanity. Her colleagues responded quickly with a mixture of disbelief and awe. Some were quick to dismiss her claims, but others were intrigued. They, too, had seen the strange anomalies in the alien attacks. Some had begun to suspect that the invaders were playing with dimensions in ways no one could understand. The team that formed was an unlikely one, made up of a handful of brilliant but eccentric minds. From every corner of the world together, they would try to accomplish the impossible. They would study the alien tech, reverse engineer it, and somehow turn the tables on their attackers. It was humanity's only chance, and as the days passed, the Galactic group grew more determined. Their mission was clear. They had to find a way to weaponize this new understanding of reality itself. And yet, as Cole's team worked tirelessly behind closed doors, the war continued outside the lab. The streets were silent except for the occasional explosion that shattered the night, the sky above dark with the shadows of the invaders' ships. It felt as if the world was holding its breath, waiting for the end. But Cole believed there was still time. There was still a chance to turn the tide. She just had to unlock the secret of their enemy's power before it was too late. The lab buzzed with a strange energy as Evelyn Cole and her team raced against time. The world outside had crumbled into chaos. Entire continents lay in ruins. The skies were darkened by alien ships that seemed to blot out the sun. But within these walls, there was a sliver of hope. The first pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Cole had spent countless sleepless nights analyzing the data she and her team had gathered from the alien wreckage. The more they studied the invaders' ships, the more it became clear that their technology wasn't just advanced, it was otherworldly. They had found no conventional propulsion systems, no standard energy sources. The ships seemed to generate their own gravitational fields, manipulating spacetime with terrifying ease. It wasn't just a new kind of technology, it was a new kind of reality, and humanity had no frame of reference for understanding it. The breakthroughs were incremental, but they were enough to drive the team forward. The first real breakthrough came when they managed to decode a fragment of the aliens' communication system, a data transmission that seemed to act like a stabilizing force on the ship's spatial distortions. Once decoded, the message wasn't an alien language at all, but a series of mathematical equations that described the bending of space and time in ways that humans had only theorized about. At first, Cole and her team could only stare in disbelief. They had expected advanced tech, but this was something else. This was beyond anything they had imagined. It was a key, a blueprint to an entirely new understanding of the universe, and it was clear now that the invaders had mastered it while humanity had barely scratched the surface. Realizing the immense significance of their discovery, Cole began to shift her focus. She had assumed that the key to defeating the invaders lay in using their own technology against them, but now she knew that understanding the rules of their universe was just as important, if not more so. What she and her team needed to do was learn how to unmake the very foundation of the alien tech by understanding the fundamental forces that powered it. Weeks turned into days and days into hours as they worked feverishly to crack the alien equations. Every moment of silence in the lab was filled with the hum of machines and the rush of thought after thought. Finally, after a long night of calculations, Cole's eyes widened with realization. She had done it. She had figured out how to disrupt the alien ship's spatial distortions by creating a series of controlled energy pulses that would interfere with their manipulation of time and space. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a start. It was a way to begin fighting back. Cole's heart pounded as she shared her discovery with the team. The room fell silent as they processed the implications of what she had uncovered. If they could generate these energy pulses on a large enough scale, they might be able to destabilize the alien ship's ability to navigate the way they did. But there were still questions. They had no answers to how could they harness such power, how could they ensure that their experiments didn't backfire and tear apart the fabric of reality itself. It was a dangerous gamble, but it was the only option they had left. Humanity's last hope didn't lie in brute force, it didn't lie in weapons or armies, it lay in understanding the very fabric of the universe and bending it to their will. If they could accomplish this, if they could somehow master what the aliens had already learned, then they might just have a chance. But with every passing day, the situation outside grew worse. The alien fleet pressed onward, their weapons never relenting. The clock was ticking, and Cole knew they had no time to waste. The fate of humanity rested on their ability to unlock the secrets of the invaders' power before it was too late. You said. The days had blurred together in a whirlwind of equations, prototypes, and relentless pressure, but inside the lab the pace had shifted from frantic to focused as Evelyn Cole and her team began testing the first of their energy pulses. Their theory was simple in concept, but incredibly complex in execution. They needed to generate a localized disruption in the fabric of space-time, something that would destabilize the alien ship's ability to warp reality around them, but make sure it didn't tear apart their own dimension in the process. They had no idea what the results would be. As Cole stood over the control panel watching the data streams flash across the monitors, she felt a knot of tension tighten in her chest. Her team had spent days calibrating the pulse generators, their machines now humming with energy. The first test was about to begin, and there was no going back. Activate the pulse generator, she ordered, her voice steady, but with an undercurrent of uncertainty. The room fell silent except for the low hum of the machinery. The pulse generator began to vibrate as it powered up. Cole held her breath. As the energy began to build, she could feel the air around her shift, a strange electric tension crackling in the atmosphere. At the moment the device reached full power, the pulse was released. A burst of energy shot out from the generator and into the test chamber. A shockwave rippled outward, and for a split second everything in the room seemed to blur and twist, as if the very air was folding in on itself. Then, nothing. Silence. The monitors flickered as they recalibrated, but there was no sign of the catastrophic failure Cole had feared. Instead, the energy readout stabilized, and the chamber appeared unchanged. What the hell just happened? One of the engineers muttered, his voice laced with disbelief. Cole leaned over the console, her eyes scanning the data, her mind racing. It worked, she said softly. The pulse had indeed disrupted the very fabric of space-time within the chamber. It was subtle but undeniable. The alien tech was designed to warp space in specific patterns, and the pulse had interfered with those patterns, destabilizing the ship's ability to maintain its dimensional manipulation. It actually worked, she repeated as the implications hit her. We can use this, said one of her colleagues. We can target the alien ships with this and tear apart their ability to control reality. But there was still a long way to go. The pulse had only been effective in a small, controlled environment. There was no guarantee it would have the same effect on the massive alien vessels that had been wreaking havoc on Earth's cities. Cole had to push forward. The technology would need to be scaled up and stabilized, but for the first time she felt a spark of hope she hadn't felt since the invasion began. Outside the lab, the world had descended further into darkness. While Cole and her team worked behind closed doors, the alien forces had become more aggressive. Their ships now patrolled in tight formations as they systematically wiped out any remaining resistance across the planet, their weapons growing more efficient as they adapted to Earth's defenses. Earth's remaining military forces had retreated into underground bunkers, leaving cities to burn as humanity's last line of defense now lay in the hands of a handful of scientists and engineers who, against all odds, had unlocked a way to fight back. But even as the team celebrated their success, Cole's thoughts were clouded by the enormity of what they were attempting to do. The power they were playing with was far beyond anything humanity had ever dared to control. She had seen the warning signs in the alien tech, the cracks in the very fabric of reality, and wondered if they could truly harness it without causing a disaster. What if they couldn't control it? What if their pulse generator caused a rift that could never be closed? But there was no time for second thoughts. The war was closing in on them. The alien ships were nearing the final assault, and Cole's team had only one option left. They had to scale up their pulse generator and deploy it on a global scale if they were to stand any chance at survival. As the team prepared for the next phase, Cole looked out the lab's windows to the sky, beyond where alien ships now loomed like vultures waiting to finish their feast. It was humanity's final stand, and they had no idea if they could succeed or if they would trigger the end of everything they knew. But one thing was clear. They couldn't stop now. The pulse was their weapon, their last hope, and they were going to use it no matter the cost. The tension in the lab was palpable as Evelyn Cole and her team worked tirelessly through the night preparing the next phase of their plan. Scaling up the pulse generator was no small task. The device that had worked so effectively in a contained environment needed to be replicated in a form that could be deployed globally, capable of reaching the alien fleet and disrupting their ship's ability to bend space-time on a massive scale. Every member of the team felt the weight of the task ahead and the crushing urgency of their situation. Cole stood at the center of the operation, coordinating the efforts of engineers, physicists, and military strategists alike. Their goal was clear: to create a series of pulse emitters strong enough to tear apart the alien ship's technology on impact. But the logistics were nightmarishly complex. Each emitter would require vast amounts of energy and precision to ensure it didn't unravel the very fabric of reality around it. Final checks on the power grids. One of the engineers called from across the room, his voice tense as he adjusted the input levels on the energy conduits. "Ensure the energy fields are stable. We can't afford a misfire," Cole responded, her voice sharp but steady as she scanned the readouts on her monitor. The team had already determined that the pulse needed to be synchronized across multiple emitters to have any hope of being effective. A single pulse would be insufficient against the massive alien ships that had begun their final approach to Earth's last stronghold. The alien fleet was closing in from the north, their ships a blanket of darkness blotting out the stars above as they hovered just out of range, waiting for the order to strike. The world outside was descending into chaos. The last remaining military forces were mobilizing in a desperate attempt to hold the line. But Cole knew they stood little chance against the overwhelming might of the alien invaders. The only chance humanity had now rested in the hands of this small group of scientists and engineers. As the clock ticked down toward the alien fleet's arrival, the pulse generators were finally ready, but the real test was about to begin. Cole stood at the heart of the makeshift command center, her eyes fixed on the central monitor as her team began the first round of global deployment. The emitters would be placed in key locations around the planet, each one linked to a central control system that would allow them to synchronize their pulses across the entire fleet. "Everything looks stable," one of the engineers reported, his voice barely audible over the hum of the generators. "Activate the synchronization process," Cole said, her tone calm but resolute. The central systems hummed to life, the pulse emitters coming online across the globe in a matter of seconds. The energy output was immense, vibrating through the very ground. They stood on. The team watched in anticipation as the first pulse was initiated. A wave of energy shot out across the atmosphere, directed toward the incoming alien ships. For a moment, there was nothing, no explosion, no sudden shift in the fabric of space-time. The pulse simply vanished into the void. Then, as if in response, a ripple of distortion ran through the atmosphere. The sky above the lab shimmered as if reality itself were warping. The monitors flickered wildly as data streams began to overload. "The pulse is hitting them," Cole muttered under her breath, eyes widening in disbelief as the readings came in. The alien ships were reacting to the energy signature. On the screens, the alien vessels began to shift and flicker, their sleek forms distorting as though they were flickering between dimensions. The air around them shimmered as the pulse affected their spatial manipulation systems. "We're in," one of the technicians shouted. "They're destabilizing. The pulse is disrupting their reality field." But just as Cole began to allow herself a breath of relief, a new problem emerged. The alien ships began to retaliate, their energy systems suddenly flaring with a new intensity as they adjusted to the pulse, quickly adapting their technology to counter the disturbance. "Deploy the second wave," Cole ordered urgently as the team scrambled to initiate the next phase of the pulse. The alien ships were adjusting too quickly, and they needed to maintain the pressure before the invaders regained control. Outside, the sky was filled with the dark silhouette of the alien fleet, and the ground beneath their feet shook as Earth's final defense mechanism launched into action. Humanity's last hope now rested on whether their experimental pulse technology could hold the alien invaders at bay long enough to turn the tide of the war, or if they were playing a dangerous game that could end with the unraveling of everything. Cole could only watch as the world teetered on the edge of collapse, hoping that what they had unlocked would be enough to stop the invaders before it was too late. The pulses were hitting the alien fleet with devastating force, but the invaders were not retreating. They were adapting. The alien ships flickered again as they shifted between dimensions, their energy fields warping and reshaping in response to the pulses. Humanity's first strike had caused chaos among their ranks, but it had not broken their will or their technology. Evelyn Cole watched the monitors as the alien vessels seemed to fight back against the pulse. The initial disruptions were effective, but as the alien ships recalibrated their energy fields, their defenses began to stabilize. The feedback loops in the pulse generators grew unstable as the system tried to match the invaders' countermeasures. "They're countering," one of the engineers said in a strained voice. "They've adjusted their shields to deflect the pulses. We can't get through anymore." Cole's mind raced as the team scrambled to adjust the pulse parameters. Once again, the initial success had come at a high cost. The emitters were reaching their limits. The energy output had to be carefully controlled, or they risked causing catastrophic interference with Earth's own systems. They couldn't afford a backfire, but the alien ships were proving far more resilient than anticipated. In the war room, commanders from Earth's last remaining military strongholds were coordinating their final stand. The forces left had already been pushed into subterranean bunkers, but now they were ready to make a desperate counteroffensive using whatever weapons they could still muster. "We can't win this on the ground," Cole said as she turned to face the team, her voice grim but resolute. "The pulse is our only shot." Outside the lab, the sound of distant explosions shook the air as the last military resistance began their doomed assault. The alien fleet's weapons fired again, cutting through the air with devastating precision. Humanity's last chance was rapidly slipping away, but Cole refused to give in. She couldn't let their work be in vain. "We need more power," she said suddenly, the realization striking her like a lightning bolt. "We need to overload the system. Just enough to push through their defenses, but not so much that it destabilizes everything." Her team turned to her, eyes wide with disbelief, but then the understanding set in. They had been approaching the problem from the wrong angle. Up until now, they had been trying to synchronize the pulses in a way that was too controlled, too structured. "We need to break their system, not mimic it," Cole continued, her voice growing in urgency. "We need to hit them with an overload. Something chaotic that they can't predict, something imperfect." The engineers scrambled to reconfigure the pulse generators as Cole's plan took shape. They would no longer try to mirror the alien technology. They would aim to tear it apart with sheer force, sending unpredictable surges through the space-time fabric they had created. The pulse would no longer be a neat, controlled wave of energy, but a chaotic barrage that would disrupt the alien ship's calculations, their dimensional shifts, and their ability to stabilize their positions. "This has to work," Cole said quietly as the new plan was initiated. Outside, the alien fleet closed in, their ships now filling the skies above Earth's last defenses. The atmosphere itself seemed to vibrate with the tension. The ground shook beneath their feet as the pulse generators powered up for the final test. The world held its breath as the first surge of energy was sent toward the alien ships. It wasn't smooth or controlled. It was a chaotic burst of energy meant to overwhelm the invaders' technology. For a moment, nothing happened. And then suddenly, the sky above erupted in a dazzling display of energy, a wave of distortion rippling through the atmosphere as the pulse collided with the alien ships. The alien fleet was forced into disarray. Ships shuddered and flickered as the chaotic energy pulses tore through their defensive fields, destabilizing their interdimensional shifts. Entire vessels were pulled out of phase with the world around them, appearing and disappearing in flashes as their core systems failed. Cole and her team watched in stunned silence as the alien ships began to crack under the pressure, their once perfect formations breaking apart as their weapon systems faltered. But there was no time to celebrate. The war was far from over, and the alien fleet was not finished yet. But for the first time, humanity had seen a glimmer of victory. The pulse had cracked their impenetrable shield and thrown them off balance, giving Earth a chance to strike back. The invaders had underestimated humanity's ability to adapt, to learn, and to fight back against an enemy that thought they were beyond defeat. Now, the real battle had begun, and the fate of Earth would be decided in the chaos of this final conflict. You said. The sky above Earth was a chaotic canvas of flickering lights and ruptured dimensions as the alien fleet began to falter under the relentless assault of humanity's experimental pulses. Ships appeared and disappeared in flashes, their once steady movements now erratic and unpredictable. The invaders' power was being undone, but the victory was far from certain. The alien forces had already begun to adapt, shifting their strategy to regain control. But for the first time in the war, their confidence seemed shaken. Evelyn Cole stood in the heart of the war room, her mind racing as she watched the monitors display the growing instability in the alien fleet. The pulse was working, but they needed more, much more. It's not enough, Cole muttered under her breath. We've hit them, but they're regenerating faster than we can disrupt them. We need to push harder. One of the engineers glanced at her, a mixture of fear and awe in his eyes. But we're already at maximum output, Dr. Cole. If we push any harder, we risk destabilizing the entire planet. We've seen the data. If the pulses go beyond this threshold, we could tear open a hole in space-time. Cole's gaze was fixed on the screen as the alien ships continued to flicker and shift, their defensive shields barely holding. We don't have a choice, she said, her voice colder than she felt. The longer we wait, the more time they have to adapt. We need to overload their systems completely. Outside, the battle raged on. Earth's remaining military forces had launched their final offensive, attempting to buy time while Cole and her team worked to finish their weapon. The alien ship's weapons lashed out, decimating the last lines of defense, but for the first time, the invaders seemed uncertain. The pulse was doing something they hadn't anticipated. It was scrambling their technology, their ability to predict and adjust. The alien commanders began to realize that they were losing control. As their ships flickered and began to break apart, they issued orders to retreat, but it was too late. Their systems were failing too rapidly. As Cole and her team initiated the next phase of the pulse, a massive surge of energy was sent directly into the heart of the alien fleet. "Brace yourselves," Cole said, her voice taut with urgency. The room was silent, every technician and scientist waiting for the moment that would decide the fate of Earth. A moment of stillness. And then, the world shook. The pulse erupted like a star collapsing in on itself, an overwhelming force that rippled across the atmosphere and struck at the core of the alien ships. The skies seemed to tear apart as the energy surged, destabilizing the invaders' shields and ripping their vessels out of sync with reality itself. The ships began to disintegrate from the inside out, their dimensional manipulations falling apart as the pulse unraveled the very fabric of their technology. The alien fleet shattered. Monitors blinked as the signals from the remaining ships flickered out, one by one. The pulsing light in the sky began to fade, and the distortion that had once warped the air cleared, leaving only the dark remnants of the alien armada scattered across the horizon. Cole exhaled, a sound she hadn't realized she'd been holding in for what felt like an eternity. But there was no time to rejoice. The battle was won, but the war wasn't over yet. There was no telling how many more fleets the invaders had, or what other weapons they had at their disposal. The damage done to their fleet was undeniable, but this was only one victory in what would surely be a much longer struggle. "What's left of their fleet?" Cole asked, her voice steady now but her eyes scanning the screen for any signs of retaliation. The technician at the console looked up, his face pale. "Most of them are gone, Dr. Cole. The remaining ships are disoriented, damaged. We don't know how many are still functional, but they're scattered." "Good," she said, nodding slowly. "We need to strike now, before they can regroup. Coordinate with the military. We'll finish this while they're weak." It was time to take the fight to the invaders. Humanity had taken a step toward survival, but the true test lay in the days to come. The invaders had seen humanity's potential, and they would not rest until they had eradicated it. But now, Earth had shown the impossible was possible. Humanity would not bow, and they would not be erased. The following days were a blur of relentless strategy and action as Earth's remaining forces launched the final counteroffensive. The alien fleet, once seemingly invincible, had been torn apart by humanity's unexpected weapon. Yet there was no time for celebration. The war was far from over, and the invaders, though disoriented and weakened, were not yet defeated. Evelyn Cole and her team continued their work around the clock, refining the pulse generators, ensuring the pulse could be delivered with pinpoint precision. Their task now was to finish what they had started, to strike at the heart of the invaders' remaining forces and drive them from Earth entirely. The once crimson sky was now streaked with smoke, and the remnants of alien ships scattered across the atmosphere. In the war rooms, military commanders had begun coordinating final strikes, but they knew it would take more than just traditional firepower. The aliens had demonstrated resilience beyond Earth's comprehension. It wasn't just about destroying their fleet. It was about ensuring that whatever remained of their forces could never threaten humanity again. The pulse was the key. If they could push it far enough to collapse the invaders' entire command structure, they might eliminate the possibility of any future assaults. "Are the launchers ready?" Cole asked as she stood in the heart of the command center, scanning the readouts. "We've deployed the pulse emitters globally," one of the engineers responded, his voice weary but filled with determination. "We're targeting the invaders' communication hub, their central nexus. If we can hit that, their entire coordination system will collapse. Without that, they'll be lost." Cole nodded. She had never imagined that the key to their survival would lie in breaking the communication systems of their attackers, but it made sense. The invaders' greatest strength was their ability to operate in perfect synchronization, to move and fight as one seamless entity. Without that unity, they would be nothing more than scattered forces, vulnerable to complete collapse. The plan was set. The pulse generators would target the alien hub, their energy fields aligned to disrupt the very core of the invaders' command infrastructure. The fleet might still have ships left, but the heart of their operation would be torn apart. "What's the status on the last wave of alien vessels?" Cole asked, tension thick in her voice. "They've gathered at the perimeter," the technician replied. "Their remaining ships are regrouping, forming a defensive formation around their command center. They're trying to buy time, but they're losing." For a moment, Cole allowed herself a small breath of relief. The pulse had worked beyond their wildest expectations. The alien forces, once all-powerful, were now scrambling. But the final strike would need to be decisive. If the invaders managed to regroup, humanity could easily be outmatched again. "Fire the pulse," Cole commanded, her voice unwavering. A moment of silence. And then the pulse detonated. It spread across the sky in an arc of energy, enveloping the alien command hub in a brilliant flash of distortion. The fabric of reality itself seemed to warp as the pulse collided with the central nexus, collapsing the command structure of the alien fleet. A ripple of energy spread outward, cascading through their ships, disrupting their ability to communicate and coordinate. For a moment, there was no movement. The alien vessels appeared to freeze mid-air, their once powerful engines sputtering as the pulse overwhelmed their systems. Then, as the ripple continued to surge, the ships began to fragment and fall apart. They imploded into themselves as their dimensional anchors failed, the pulse rendering their technology useless in a matter of seconds. The remaining ships disintegrated in the skies, leaving nothing but debris behind. Cole stared at the screens, disbelief and triumph warring within her. The invasion was over. The alien forces that had threatened to wipe humanity from existence were gone, their vast fleet reduced to nothing in the wake of their own arrogance. But as the remnants of the invaders vanished from Earth's skies, Cole couldn't shake the feeling that this victory was only the beginning. There were still questions to answer. How had the invaders arrived in the first place? And who had sent them? As the final ships fell from the sky, humanity began to rebuild, but Cole knew the story was far from finished. The Pulse had opened a new chapter in Earth's history, one in which humanity had proven that even in the face of impossible odds, they would rise, adapt, and fight back. Earth had not just survived, it had fought back and won. But one thing was certain: the invaders had left their mark, and Earth would be ready for whatever came next.